Yeah. And we're on YouTube.
Okay. Yeah, just let me know when either councilman joins, please.
Yes, sir. And Councilmember Griffin is joining now.
Great.
And you do have a quorum if you want to begin.
Okay. Let's do that, and I'm gonna ask give the mayor privilege of having an invocation.
Oh, well, thank you. Let us pray. Lord God, please guide us as we make decisions for our city and our citizens, and keep us ever mindful of the needs and feelings of others. In your name we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We can get the minutes approved, minutes for the 13th being deferred. Can we get a motion to approve the minutes from the September 27th of 21? Is there a motion? Okay, motion properly moved. We have a second.
Second.
Properly moved and second. Any question on those minutes? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed?
Aye.
All right, thank you. Acceptance, we down to accept item E, acceptance and dedication for rights of way, Mr. O'Brien.
Mr. Chairman, we need to go back to item C. We got a request to set a public hearing.
Okay, let's go back then. Item C. You're gonna address that? Okay.
This is a request to set a public hearing for the closing and abandonment of Ackerman Court located off of St. Philip Street, kind of heading in an easterly direction towards King Street around the Post and Courier parking lot area. There's a project that's is proposed for that area, and the company that's doing the project has purchased a lot of the land around there. In order to build the project they want to build, they're requesting that this short, really unimproved street be closed and abandoned. So what we're asking the committee to do is to set a public hearing for November 23rd at City Council. In the meantime, we'll do our due diligence, checking with all departments, utility companies in the neighborhood to make sure there's no opposition.
Yeah, I'm just kind of curious. Does that look like a little alleyway that goes from King?
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
Yes, sir. That's it.
Yeah. Any questions?
I'll move for approval.
Probably no second. Okay. Any discussion on that? Abandonment. Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you, Mr. O'Brien, for
Yes, sir.
catching me on that one. Now item E, acceptance and dedication, Mr. O'Brien.
Yes, sir. This is one of our letters to DOT saying that we're going to accept maintenance responsibility for some granite curb that's going in at the project at 1084 King Street. And it's a standard letter that we've sent numerous times. So we're just asking permission for us to take over that granite curb, which was required during the TRC process for the applicant to put in.
And we're going to ask Councilman Sheed to move approval on that one.
Yeah, you know how I feel about that.
I'll move for approval.
Properly moved, and we have a second out there. Can we get a second of that motion, please?
Second.
Properly moved and second. And any more discussion on that? All in favor, please say aye.
Could I ask Tom what property that is?
Mayor, I'd have to let me look real quick on my agenda here, and I can tell you real quickly here.
This is 1084 King Street.
My Google map shows it to be the Central Mosque, but I don't know if that's correct or not.
What I have shown, Mayor, on the submittal that came in, this is on King Street, and it's between it's 180 feet to Romney Street and 220 to Poinsett Street. I'll go ahead, Mayor. I'll Google after I finish my next portion and get the exact, because that's the location in the letter, and I'm trying to see if it says in the project letter.
Well, either Google Map is wrong, or the address isn't quite right. So You might just double check the address.
Yes, sir. That's the letter that's on the address from the engineer, but I will double check the address to make sure.
All right, thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
So what's the pleasure of the committee? Want to carry the motion as stated? We do have a motion. I mean, Councilman Griffin made it.
All right.
So you have any unreadiness, Mr. Mayor? You want to carry the motion as stated, or how do you want to handle this?
Well, if he's saying it's between Romney and Poinsett Street, that's the block to the south of where Google says 1084 is, but maybe Google is wrong. I don't know.
You might be right.
Mayor, I've got the submittal here in the full package. I'll check it when Matt's making his report.
Okay, terrific.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
So we want to defer that and come back to it?
If you don't mind, let's just make sure
let's
we
just
got
do that. We'll defer that and give them a little more time. We don't have any temporary encroachments. Now, stormwater management update. Mr. Fountain?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we've got 3 items today. The first item is the Market Street Drainage Improvement and Streetscape Project. This is recommending the approval of fee amendment number 17 with Davison Floyd in the amount of $371,000. And this is the work if we want to add the design of electrical services, conduit, and handholds to basically support the undergrounding of power along the project corridor. This includes basically reconnection design for approximately 62 electric meters along the corridor. Conversion design is Dominion will be changing the voltage for the system from 240 volt to 208 volt as part of their design, which has an impact from electrical service perspective. And then basically, as we talked about, building in the conduit and the handholds to try to minimize what will be removed from the streetscaping by Dominion during the construction work, during the undergrounding after we've completed the drainage and streetscaping work.
Okay. We have a motion?
I'll move for approval.
Second.
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye. Oh, Mr. Mayor?
I did have a question, just for my own edification, Matt. If this were a regular undergrounding project, like we're contemplating with Anson Borough, for example, this particular cost would normally be included with the project, wouldn't it? This is for the service connection to the individual homeowner or property owner.
So that's a good question, Mary. This one's on a specific MOU for the Market Street project back from kind of the origination of the Market Street project,
Right.
probably 9 years ago.
Maybe 20 years ago.
Yeah, I am not as familiar with the normal undergrounding agreement as I am with this agreement because we don't normally do power undergrounding.
Yeah.
I know in a lot of situations it's left up to the property owners to deal with the reconnection, but that's a relatively significant expense you're putting onto each of the property owners who may or may not be able to reconnect their power. So I think in this situation, we had said since it's part of the project that we're doing, it's worth putting in that effort. The other portion of this cost is a little bit unusual. And I think you're right that typically it would be more a cost borne by Dominion, is that in most neighborhoods, the work to underground the power is basically ripping up either an asphalt street or a concrete sidewalk, and you just, Dominion will replace it in kind as part of the undergrounding. In this one, they would still replace it in kind at their own expense if we didn't provide conduit and handholds. The problem is that we'll have just gone through and basically streetscaped the entire area. So we don't want them to put back, concrete and asphalt. We want them to put back the
Bluestone.
Yeah, basically the level of design that we're doing. So what we're doing to kind of avoid that conflict is we're going to run the conduit with their coordination and install the handholds in kind of the decorative sidewalk so that they can pull line through those as the project goes rather than have to tear everything up. And I'm sure it won't be perfect, but it'll substantially reduce the amount of rework, especially in a corridor where that likely will go through 3 years of a construction project to have this happen. the last thing we really want to do is immediately start another construction project on top of them. It's a lot of patience we're asking for out of the citizenry there.
Right. All right, I was just curious. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and Dominion has been pretty responsive. I think this one's been a little bit tricky in that we started out with an SE and G team, and now we have a Dominion team, and they just have slightly different ways that they run undergrounding projects. So this is kind of getting up to speed on what Dominion would require, since most of the SE and G team has retired at this point during that shift to Dominion.
Gotcha. Thank you.
All right, any more questions on that? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you. Item H2, Mr. Fountain. Oh, this is a good one. Mr.
Yeah,
Fountain.
thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I know this is one you've been waiting for. So this is a professional service contract, recommended award of a professional service contract with Wolpert for the amount of $49,785. And basically, this is a stormwater utility fee billing method analysis. So the intent here is to use the stormwater operations account funding to basically hire Wolpert to look at our stormwater fee, build a spreadsheet tool that you can use to run different modeling scenarios of what you would do with fees, and then look at how else could we bill our fee versus the CWS process. Specifically, we're looking at if we moved it to the county tax bill, what would that entail? How would it work? What additional revenue might we be able to achieve, and then give us a report on some recommendations.
I'll move for approval.
Thank you, Councilman Griffin. Any a second out there?
Second.
Second.
Oh, thank you. Good work on everybody on this one. I know you got 999 things to do, Mr. Fountain, but I appreciate you and the mayor getting on this one here. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you. Church Creek update on project options and current work plan requested by Councilman Griffin. Councilman Griffin?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just was hoping to get an update on especially the Weston and Sampson projects that we were presented with recommendations back at the end of 2017. I know that we've done some design engineering on some of them, but just wanted to see how we were incorporating some of these grants that we've gotten, and also just our general philosophy on some of these projects, because some of them were not very expensive, while others were, such as a $20 million plus pump station. So I'm just wondering what our philosophy is moving forward now that we're about 4 years into those recommendations, and kind of what our stance is as a city as to whether or not we're going to be looking to complete some of those projects, or whether or not we're going to tie it into some of the other studies that we've done and go a different direction.
Okay, Mr. Fountain, can you address that or touch bases on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm going to run through Councilman Griffin, the recommendations from the Weston Sampson report, and kind of give you an update on where each of those stands, and then we'll see if we have questions or want to talk about it in more detail. So I'm not going to give these quite in the order they're presented in the Weston Sampson report, but give them more in, I think, an order that'll be a little easier to follow for the purposes of this discussion. The first recommendation, shouldn't say the easiest, probably one of the more challenging recommendations, but one that was very important and was accomplished by council and the stormwater department, was the policy recommendation that Weston Sampson made, and that was to change the stormwater design standards manual, basically create a custom set of requirements for the Church Creek Basin that are based on the model that both Wolpert and Weston Sampson have kind of collaboratively developed, that looks at how stormwater flows throughout that entire basin. We did update the manual for that. We did incorporate this special basin. It does require fill mitigation. If you fill anywhere within the floodplain, basically, not only are you cutting the same amount of fill, you're actually cutting more fill than 1.25 times as much fill as you place. So that's a big difference. That was very important for this basin because it's so sensitive to flooding and storage issues. We changed our design storms to account for a 72-hour period instead of a 24-hour period, which is another thing that came out of the custom modeling. That's a very long duration analysis you have to run, but it's because this basin's so large and it all funnels down to the same choke points. And then we made a series of other somewhat more minor changes that have a big impact from an engineering perspective. and that all went into effect. That exists now. Some of that was actually used to model or pilot the special protection area requirements in the new manual that was passed as well for the city. So we've extended that out into other basins, more customized for the other basins, where Church Creek's a little more stringent even than the rest of the special protection areas. But that was kind of the first recommendation and the first thing we did put in. Kind of going through the other project areas, there was a recommendation for tidal surge protection. That's one there's a need if you install a pump station, basically to prevent tidal water from coming back up into the pump station, or else you just end up circulating ocean water and burning out your pumps. That one was looked at in more detail by both us with Weston Sampson and actually some outside consultants in the area. And the level of protection is relatively low if you don't have the pump station. Only adds protection during really, really massive tide events that also have major rain events, and it's still a few $1 million. So that one we've kind of put on hold until such time as there is a pump station. Weston Sampson's concurred with that it really makes the most sense as a pump station supplement. We looked at the improvements to the main road area drainage. So this is basically the portion of Church Creek that sort of, we call it the Plank Canal area. Sometimes it flows either way, depending on what the storms are doing and what the flooding is doing. It can either flow down towards the Crosstown Church and the major outfall, or it can kind of flow down through Beast Ferry Road, basically all the way out to Main Road, where the main road flooding occurs. And if you're familiar with the RV park down there, that's kind of the outfall area for that flooding. That is another significant area for improvement, in that both areas currently flood, but if you can relieve flooding in either area, it would help the other area. And this is a project that's been making progress. It's actually one that Charleston County has the lead on. They were successful in acquiring a FEMA grant to look at improving the culverts under the railroad in that area and under Main Road. That grant is moved from initial design work into more of a final design and permitting process. So that's still underway. It's a long-term project because the way FEMA is set up and the complexity of dealing with the CSX Amtrak line there, but it's one that's got a design and got some real potential for improvement. It's also incorporated into the Main Road widening project as the county makes progress on that kind of corridor of improving traffic flow onto Johns Island. They're looking at it from a drainage perspective of how could that relieve some of that flow out of Church Creek. Once one of those downstream improvements is done, there'd be the potential to improve some of the canals to help more water go that direction without worsening anyone's flooding. So that would be the next step is kind of that project proceeds. But that's a very large scale, another multi-million-dollar project until you get to the Main Road widening, then it becomes tens of millions of dollars. But it is still moving. It's just on that major infrastructure timeframe. The next one was upper basin improvements. So this was talking about what could you do in sort of the Long Savannah, especially the Village Green Phase 3 section of Long Savannah, to help relieve some of the pressure of that water coming down all the way down through the basin and again into the railroad and causing flooding. There's a couple of things we've done there. One that was passed by council relatively recently was when we extended the Long Savannah Village Green Phase 3 development agreement. We did require the developer to comply with the most current stormwater manual, which brings in those Church Creek regulations and all special protection area regulations, which requires them to build quite a bit of additional storage versus what the old development agreement would have required or could have required, depending on the interpretation. It also, you may recall this, there was a negotiation with recreational space versus pond space to require the developer to use part of the original space that they'd proposed to build larger stormwater ponds that would also become recreational ponds. That was kind of a multifaceted agreement because it also required them to build much higher quality recreational facilities, even though they're building a slightly lower acreage of facility. It required it to be basically like active recreation fields, like soccer fields and baseball fields, rather than sort of just generic space that could be used for recreation, which was sort of the original development agreement. So a lot of things were accomplished in that same development agreement modification, but some of them made a significant improvement to this recommendation in the Weston Sampson report to basically store more water at the top of the basin and keep it from coming down and flooding people as quickly. Biohabitats, who's been working in the basin on our mid-basin storage project, has also made some recommendations in their kind of overall basin thoughts. It's very similar with Weston Sampson of looking to try to divert more water under Highway 61 and out into the Ashley River as sort of a long-term project as some of those developments come online in the area. So that's something we'll be continuing to encourage developers to look at, because that would push them out of the requirements from the Church Creek basins. They could have a lower stormwater requirement, but they'd actually provide probably even more benefit if they could get that improvement corridor out into the Ashley River. And there's some options on a couple of the larger tracks up there to do that. So we'll see if that keeps developing, and we'll look to see if the city could help supplement that in the future as well. The Hickory Farms Diversion Channel was one of the recommended projects. This is another one that really leverages the pump station to be especially effective. There is some minor improvement. If you build it even without the pump station, you can certainly avoid some of the overland flow that kind of comes with velocity through that subdivision. We did take that through preliminary design about 3 years ago. We did propose it to the neighborhood. The neighborhood was generally concerned with the fact that the water would continue coming through the neighborhood without the pump station approach. So that one's sort of been put on the sideboard as well in case the pump station progresses. The pump station itself was one of the recommendations, which I keep talking about. Probably should have started with that one. That one, because the funding considerations is still sort of on hold. It's a possible option that could be looked at one day, but it's likely, it's a very, very long run of outfall pipe with a lot of property acquisition. So it's likely to be very, very expensive. And I think realistically, from what we've seen on our recent pump station constructions, you're probably looking at somewhere on the order of $50 million just for the station itself. So we've got that one as an option. It certainly has some potential for benefit, but it's a very, very high cost. So we're looking to see some other cost benefit projects rather than that to start out with and see what improvements we get. Channel maintenance. This is one that much of this work was accomplished as well. Kind of we went through and did major maintenance, pulled a lot of the snags and debris out of the major canals, put in a more regular inspection program onto some of the culverts and major crossings where we're likely to get blockages and have problems. We also do monthly spraying for aquatic weeds to try to prevent the aquatic weeds from basically forming and then getting caught on those snags and causing blockages. We have a hotspot inspection protocol in the neighborhood. Basically in our rain days before major storm events, they go through and check the major blockage areas to see if there's any problems that they need to address. Of course, this is something we could do better, just like we could throughout the whole city. You can always do more, but we're certainly doing a much better job, I think, than we had historically done in the area. And it's probably getting close to time to try to look at another major cleaning after all the recent hurricanes we've had and tree fall we've had through the area. The Lake Dodder kind of flow diversion was looked at. We're trying to direct water from Church Creek into Lake Dodder and then down through Long Branch Creek. We did hire Weston Sampson to do quite a bit of additional modeling on that approach. The more detailed modeling we did, the more it shows that because of the tidal impacts in that section of the basin, you're not likely to see any significant improvement in the Church Creek watershed from that work, but you are likely to see a significant amount of improvement in Lake Dodder and potentially even in Long Branch Creek. So that project is still a potential project, but one that sort of falls outside of the Church Creek improvement basin now. It's more of a Lake Dodder or Long Branch Creek improvement project. It's sort of continuing to be looked at, including with the Glen McConnell widening, talking with the county about the potential to install culvert pipes under Glen McConnell during that widening, which would be the first step in that project. The last one, the CSX canal improvements. This was basically looking at trying to direct more water from kind of the Grand Oaks area down through behind the Walmart and down into the Crosstown Church area. This is one that we were hoping would show some real benefits. We did a really detailed hydraulic model of it. And unfortunately, it ends up providing too much worsening at the church for the benefit that it provides upstream. You do move water very effectively. You just move it too quickly into the area that's already flooding. So that one got also put on the side as saying it's not unless you have a pump station, it's not an effective way to handle flooding in the short run. That one though did create some of the benefit or some of the idea for this mid-basin storage project that we're looking at, because since conveying too much water down to the church caused a problem, the idea was, well, could we slow the water that's coming to the church instead? That's where we've been looking at the Bridgepoint Apartments, the work over on Mallor and Wolk Drive, and then the work around the church, basically to say, instead of bringing water there faster? Can we take the water that's already coming there, slow it down by adding into these wetlands and floodplains, hold the water in kind of ecological parks, and then allow it to eventually flow out of the basin when the basin recovers? So that modeling did show significant benefit. Again, for the level of cost, we were successful in the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation grants for that. And obviously council has continued to pass the design work and permitting work to continue those projects. So we hope to see the Mowler and Wolf Drive, which are the short-term kind of smaller projects, in construction within the next few months. Bridgepoint is going into final design and permitting now and should be in construction probably by the end of next year, or at least out to bid by the end of next year, depending on environmental permitting. And then the church should follow within 6 months or so after that into construction, the general area around the church, I should say, with a larger ecological park in that area as well. So quite a bit of short-term, medium-term, and long-term progress have already happened. Certainly we're seeing the impact of the Stormwater Design Standard Manual changes on the way development is happening in the basin. That's been the biggest, most effective impact. The maintenance, I think, has done a lot to reduce the additional flooding we've seen since that 2015, 2016. We really haven't seen the same level of flooding as we did at that point. It still absolutely floods in the area, but it does drain out a little bit better. It does reduce the frequency of flooding. And then we'll continue to work through these storage projects to help bring that water level down during flooding further. And as the TIF comes online and hopefully starts generating some revenue, we'll be able to look at our next round of projects to do some additional work in the area as well. So hopefully that's a relatively short summary on the area, on a relatively complicated area with a lot going on in it, but please let me know if you have any questions.
Councilman Griffin, and then I'll go to Mr. Mayor.
And I want to thank you so much, Matt, for all of this information. Obviously, it's disappointing to hear that we've tabled pretty much all of the recommendations or the blueprint that Weston and Sampson laid out, but I understand that we've had several other opinions since then. You know, we've had the Dutch come in and look at it as well, and I think our philosophy as a city has changed, or it's at the point where we don't know whether or not investing in this pump station is what we want to do or not. So hold on one second. Sorry about that. Riding in the car and my person I'm with got to put their seatbelt on. Matt, let me ask you this. When did we sort of make the decision that the pump station wasn't really the game plan that we were trying to go? And then as a follow-up to that, everybody knows last week we got hit pretty hard over in outer West Ashley with rain. And unfortunately, most of our ditches over in Church Creek, the Church Creek area, Shadow Moss, Hickory Hill, Hickory Farm, were all filled pretty much to the brim because we got hit at high tide. Now, when it comes to Hickory Farms, a lot of their problem that I'm seeing is that they have runoff that's coming in from some of these newer developments behind them, such as Sable Homes and some other areas of Grand Oaks that have just recently been built out. What can we do to help those guys other than try to continue to run the water through their neighborhood? And, my third question is, Matt, I know that we are severely understaffed right now. We only have, I think, 2 crews that are able to go in and clean out ditches within our neighborhoods. What have you seen in terms of employment, and what can city council do to help you get more staffing and improve that aspect? Because I know it's got to be hard to cover the entire city with only 2 crews.
Mr. Chairman, you're all right with me?
Yeah, Mr. Fountain.
Thank you. Yeah, so Councilor Griffin, you're right. We basically had 9 recommendations from Weston Sampson. 5 of those were progressed, which is not bad from a concept perspective, but you're right that some of them certainly were not progressed at this point. The 9th one you could argue we did or did not, and that it's the canal improvements, which we ended up turning into the mid-basin storage project, but it wasn't the original recommendation. It just led to a recommendation. From the pump station perspective, so I guess we don't make a decision at staff on whether or not to progress a project. We progress the projects that are funded through the drainage fund for council until such funding is identified for the pump station. We're unlikely to bring recommendations that don't have a funding associated with them, because we'd have to basically go back through budget ad hoc and have them make the recommendation for funding. So it's certainly a lot of money. It's a very large station. We've continued to look for grant opportunities for it or other approaches that council may see possibilities for. But it's a project that's generally about 5 times the size of most of the projects that we fund as a city. So we do look for options. We haven't found one that's a good fit at this point, but we'll continue to look. I'm trying to remember what the staffing question. So it is a very good point. We're definitely struggling with staffing at the moment. We're sitting at roughly 50% staff in our field operations group from what we're budgeted for. It's not unusual that we run more of like a 80 to 90% staffing. We do generally hire quite a few temps. Temps are very difficult to acquire at the moment because of the industry. The main thing, honestly, for most of the employees is just salary at this point. That we pay relatively low salaries compared to the construction industry, and these are mostly construction style jobs, and they're just very difficult to hire for.
Mr. Mayor.
So Matt, if you mentioned this, I might have missed it. I remember one of the recommendations was about the culverts that go under the railroad tracks. And maybe you're just keeping a good eye on that from a maintenance point of view. I know discussion a little ways ago was that getting the railroad to agree to anything different would be a very difficult lift. But anyway, did you mention that, or do you have any information on that, on those culverts?
Yeah, so the main recommendation that Weston Sampson had on those culverts was looking at the tidal surge protection, the check valves on those culverts. The issue with that was that there is a minor benefit at a very high tide without a pump station, but the cost on those is probably on the order of at least $3 million to install something like that. So I think for how minor the benefits were, I mean, Weston Sampson had recommended them assuming a pump station would be built. And that's how the report reads, is that if you're going to build the pump station, you could install these now because you'll get some very minor benefit in the interim while you're going through the 10-year process of designing and permitting a pump station. But if you're not intending to permit the design and build the pump station in the immediate future, cost-wise, then the culverts don't provide much benefit versus other projects where that $3 million could be used basically more efficiently, like the mid-basin storage that we've been doing or some of the maintenance work we've been doing. Separately, we've looked with both Weston Sampson and Biohabitats at the culverts is under Beast Ferry Road that lead through the previous improvement project that the city put in with the diversion. If anyone's familiar with the diversion channel or the diversion box culverts that kind of go down basically across from that Mallard Drive, Wolk Court area. There's a large box culvert down and it goes to a power line right away and flows out into the lower part of Church Creek. We've looked at potentially upsizing that. That's still in an early stage of review. That does, again, it's another outfall kind of choke point for the neighborhood. One of the tricky parts from all of those has been that avoiding negative impacts on the property owners between 61 and the railroad track is difficult because that area, Councilman Griffin's right, at high tide, that area receives a lot of water at high tide coming under Highway 61. So if you're bringing the tide into that area and bringing rainwater faster from the basin in an area that already has quite a bit of structural home flooding, you've got to figure out how to manage that. We did look at some options with Weston Sampson. The classic approaches for something like that would be to either dredge the creek, which is spectacularly difficult because it's like a 5 mile long creek, the way it meanders. So the mitigation would be tremendous. I don't know that you'd even get a permit even with mitigation to do that. The other option that Weston Sampson looked at was potentially tide protection under Highway 61. That's still a possible option. In some ways, you get more protection from some of that. You do have the challenge that impacts that 5 miles of marsh and creeks. You'd have to figure out a way to basically only close it in extreme, like hurricane style events, which again is possible, and it's something we can continue to look at. It just didn't get shortlisted because again, that's a really expensive, incredibly high environmental permitting lift. It's doable and it might provide some protection. It's just sort of one of those projects that's in our next queue of items to consider with biohabitats. That the Highway 61 diversion would be the same thing, to bring more water in the north out through under Highway 61, kind of through the plantation areas on the north. There's some nice canals and old, like probably timber harvesting and phosphate mining areas that clearly were old canals that drain through that area that we can try to restore and improve. So there are a few ideas we have like that. Those are just bigger, longer term, high permit lift type projects. We're continuing to look at all of them.
Thank you.
It is a tough area. I mean, it's a big basin with a lot going on.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay, any questions from any other council members? I have, I guess, some information for discussion. One is, Mr. Fountain, I think you and even Mr. Mayor, you may be familiar with this. There's an issue with Ashley Harbor with, I think, a stopped up drain, something over there. And cause, you know, Ashley Harbor is, I think, the only gated community anyway, allowed in the city of Charleston. And obviously they pay stormwater fees, and I get the rationale. Believe me, I don't have to be convinced. Obviously, when the water runs from the private streets, eventually enters a public system, and those public system ditches and pipes need to be opened. And that's what stormwater is for. But I was wondering whether we could maybe have legal look into maybe doing a MOU on something like that. If they were to agree to pay our cost or whatever. I don't think that happens that often. My understanding in the past, the city has done that, gone in and sucked out a drain or two. But can we have our legal, have the consideration to look for having some kind of MOU on something like that? It'll probably take longer for the truck to drive over there than it'll take to suck the thing out. But anyway, that's my thought for the day on that one. You have any discussion on that? I'll just take that for information and maybe respond back in 2 weeks.
Well,
Were you familiar with that, Mr. Mayor?
Not really. I'd be happy to dig into it a little deeper.
Well, let me give it a little bit more. Over in Ashley Harbor, apparently they had a drainage. Oh, Mr. Fountain, are you familiar with it?
Yes, yeah, Councilman Shealy had asked me about it.
Okay, can you touch base on that with the mayor then?
Yeah, I can. So I think the request had come in. They have basically a grate inlet, I think, in the street that has clogging in it. They were asking if we could clean and maintain the inlet. As Councilman Waring mentioned, it's a private road with private drainage infrastructure, and Councilman Waring's right that it's an unusual one in that most of their infrastructure does not drain back into the public infrastructure; it generally drains out. There are some communities, Councilman Waring sort of touched on it, that allow a stormwater fee credit for that type of situation. The city doesn't really have a current credit manual that reads in a useful manner. There was one from a very long time ago that was built before the state had its own stormwater ordinances, when it was still DHEC regulating, that we haven't used. And we could certainly update that and consider that as part of our stormwater utility fee assessment. I think Councilman Waring was specifically referring to was maintenance on them. And I think we've talked with legal, and the concern is the city's generally not supposed to use even utility fee, much less taxpayer money, to obviously do work on private property, right? It's a benefit to a private citizen.
Right.
And I certainly understand where the community is coming from with the fact that they pay the fee and they would like to have their drains cleaned. And it's sort of a similar situation to when the road needs to be resurfaced or potholes need to be patched. And I think, Councilman Waring, you're right. I mean, if there's a life safety issue, like during hurricane recovery, or if there's flooding that isn't leaving, those are times where sometimes there's a potential to clean something out so a fire truck can get through and do that kind of work. But from a regular maintenance perspective, we can certainly reach out to the legal department and see if they have any recommendations.
Yeah, I was just thinking MOU. I think these people are probably, I can't speak for them, but obviously we don't do it. They got to hire a private truck to come out there. So, I mean, if we can have some sort of MOU agreement, I think they'd be willing to do that. But I thought it was worth looking into it. That's all.
We'll look into it. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you both. And then the second thing I have is being in the lucky spot, I got a letter from an attorney about a drainage issue that Mr. Fountain and I met with over in the Doo-Wop area, Mr. Mayor. I got this Friday. And anyway, it's over. Mr. Fountain called a meeting with one of his staff and the county, because you know that's a joint venture over there trying to correct the drainage over the Doo-Wop area. And apparently a couple of these owners, they thanked us for that meeting. And I'm gonna pass this on to you, by the way. But he refers to his clients. He wants to pull together another meeting like that between the city and the county and the staff as to what are we doing to help improve drainage in that area. But in the last paragraph, he refers to my client's problems are due to insufficient maintenance of the existing drainage. And he goes on, well, I figured that was above my pay grade. So then I'm gonna send that to you and so others can take a look at it on the committee. But we probably can, on the next meeting, maybe have an update on the Doo-Wop drainage situation. But he just doesn't know the work that's being done, to try get things done over there. And I think the people don't either. So so maybe we can get an update in conjunction with the county to let those people, because half of those people in the county and maybe half, if that, is in the city. But certainly some kind of communique needs to go out, letting those people know that, hey, we're getting close. We're not quite there yet, but we're a long way from where we were 2 years ago. So anyway, I'll pass this on to you and the council members and have our legal team maybe address this attorney.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, with that, any information to come forward?
Mr. Chairman,
I have an update for the mayor on 1084 King Street.
Oh yeah, I pulled it up too, Mr. Mayor. My Google had that building being, remember the old skate rink that's on King Street that's now affordable housing? It's between that and Romney Street. I thought the old RKO building, that's what I remember.
It says it's the old print shop, and they're turning it into a commercial kitchen where this DoorDash operation, people actually cook food there and they dispatch from there. So that's where that's at.
It's kind of directly across the street from Dart Hall Library.
Okay.
Well, flat top block building in there. Councilman Griffin, I see you here.
Yes, sir. I was just wondering, Mr. Fountain touched on how his crews are at 50% of what is budgeted. What about our public services division? What are we looking at for our CDL drivers, our sanitation workers? Do we know that information?
Mr. O'Brien?
Yes, sir. I've got Mr. Alltop on the call who's got the accurate up-to-date numbers. I know what they generally are, but Matt can give you that. I will tell you that our HR department works tirelessly with us to try and hire CDL drivers, and we just don't get any applicants. And they work very hard. They look at a lot of places, but it's not a problem just common to us. There are several areas. There's a billboard on the interstate coming down every day. I see coming to work. There's a private company begging for CDL drivers too. So, Matt, you want to tell them what our situation is currently with drivers?
So I would say we're roughly right about 40 to 50% as well. We are struggling heavily to recruit drivers to the point where the last couple of weeks has been pretty tough. We have been having to work a tremendous amount of overtime and on Friday as well to cover everything and get everything collected.
Okay, Councilman Griffin.
Just to follow up with that too, everybody knows that there was an executive order to, make all of our employees get the vaccine by a certain date. I'm very, very concerned that, we're looking at numbers that we're 6 or 7 years behind where we should be with the number of employees. And I'm very concerned that we may lose some other very, very, very important city employees come next month when this vaccine mandate goes into place. So, I would hope, Mr. Mayor, that you would look at that and potentially rescind that mandate, because I'm very, very concerned that we're not going to be able to offer the essential services that our taxpayers pay us every year to do. I'm very, very concerned as to what we're going to look at in terms of the services that we can offer when our departments are already telling us that we're 50, 60% understaffed. This could add another layer of 10% on that could significantly impact the job that we do as a city. And I hope that we'll take that very seriously, Mr. Mayor. I'll plan to ask you that tomorrow night at City Council.
Thank you,
Mr. Chairman.
Somebody's trying, is this,
Yeah, me.
okay, Councilman, Shaheen.
Yes, sir. I think that this is getting into dangerous territory. When you start talking about that this vaccine is going to create a shortage of workforce. That's not the problem. And we've had several discussions about the shortage of workforce, and it's across the city. We know what levels this is affecting. We talked about this at our budget workshop meeting just recently last week. So to go out there and to say that the vaccine mandate is causing a workforce shortage is dangerous, and it really is quite dangerous. The vaccine mandate is something I support the mayor in doing, because it's there to protect our citizens and our workforce so that we don't have a reduction in workforce. We've had a number of people out because of COVID-19. Hopefully what's happening with this thing is that we're turning the corner, because locally in the city of Charleston, in the city of South Carolina, and nationally, we've seen a huge uptake on the people getting the vaccine. So I think we have to be very careful how we talk about whether or not this vaccine mandate will create a workforce shortage. That's not the issue we're dealing with. We've got other issues dealing with our pay grades, the number of folks out in the workforce available to us to employ. This is not just something that's happened in the city of Charleston. And to make those kind of comments, I think, is somewhat misleading to the public. And I want to make sure that we're not sending out the wrong message about that. If you want to bring it up at the city council meeting tomorrow, my response today is going to be the same response I give you tomorrow, that we've got to be careful what we talk about. We talk about these vaccine mandates creating a workforce shortage. That's not the case at all. There are other issues that are engaged with this thing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, Councilman Griffin.
Well, and Councilmember Shedd, I believe I'm just as much a city councilman as you are. And I'm telling you that I have had several discussions with our city employees. We have up to what could be up to 10% of our workforce that is going to not have a job because of these vaccine mandates. So I don't think there's anything wrong with me saying that is a potential to lose employees. The fact is, it could happen, and we need to be prepared for it. So I don't need you to speak on behalf of me. I'm speaking on behalf of District 10, and as their city councilman, there is a potential that we could lose employees.
And I'm speaking on behalf of the city because I've been engaged
Let me
in the
get back
process.
in, Councilman, let me
I'm
get back
sorry.
in control. I understand. Let me get back in control. The mayor wants to be recognized.
Go ahead.
Let me do that.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to bring back to your attention so we could maybe stay on the agenda.
You're right. You're right.
that
We need to get back to item E.
Vote on the
Item E.
application for 1084 King Street before.
All
we-
right. Let me get back to the agenda, gentlemen. Mayor's right on that. Mr. O'Brien pointed out where that building is, and hopefully a new business is going to be moving in there. Do we have an approval for the acceptance and dedication of item E1? We have a motion for that?
So moved.
I second.
Probably moved in second. Any discussion on that? Any more discussion on that? Hearing none. All in favor?
Say aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. I don't know if somebody's trying to get recognized. Any new business to come forward? With that, by acclamation, I call the meeting to end, and then we'll see you tomorrow. Everybody stay